Hello and welcome to Being Brasian. It's been a long time, but we are back and we are back with a very special guest. So today we have a very special episode discussing the important topic of sexuality within the ESEA community. We invited a dear friend of mine, you see below,
Hi.
Bear. So that's Bear to our discussion today. He's kindly agreed to answer all our questions around this subject. Thank you for joining us today, and it's really lovely to have you. We've known each other a long time, so we'll learn some new things about each other as well today.
A very long time.
I know. I suppose the first question we wanted to pose to you was, what was it like growing up as a Thai person and being gay?
I've thought about this. It's an interesting one because I'm glad that you invited me onto this vlog. Thank you very much. I'm honoured to be here because it's something I've never actually really spoken about. And every LGBT plus person's experience of coming out, of life, of living as an LGBT plus person is different. I wouldn't be able to speak for any of them. But the one common sort of thing that I could share with some people is being Asian and being LGBT, especially as diaspora, especially as somebody who's grown up in the UK and specifically London. To be honest with you, being gay and being Thai hasn't been that difficult for me, because I think you'll agree, Amra, that in my generation specifically, I'm probably the most prolific gay person in the whole community. I don't think there's anyone else that probably stands out as much as I do. I mean, if they haven't come out yet, then I don't think they will.
You set the trend.
I've set the trend. And to be fair, I think because most of the people who'd immigrated to the UK from Thailand, who were part of our parents' generation, were already quite progressive. They were coming here because they were already sort of looking for a modern way of life. It wasn't just to come to make money or to come to sort of improve their opportunities. It was because they already had a sort of modern outlook on things, which is great. It's difficult for me to say, that I came out, because I never did. I kind of felt as if I just sort of crashed onto the planet and that was it. I was there. If anything, it was society that turned around one day and said, okay, you're gay. And I was like, okay, well, that's what I am. But I never felt like there was a change in me, or I had to sort of accept anything or come out, because it was just me. I was always just me. People like yourself, Amra, I mean, we used to sort of dance along to, Madonna and, and whoever else sort of from a very early age. I'm not saying that that's what constitutes a gay person, but you were definitely part of me expressing myself and me feeling very comfortable with who I am,
Yes.
And I was really lucky to have Thai friends like you who actually never doubted who I was, but at the same time, you never sort of made me feel outside or made me feel like I was different to you or to normal people. And that I'm so grateful for. In terms of the Thai community, that subject we can talk about in stages. I think to some degree, and I say this blushing, is I think most of the Thai community probably knew I was gay from a very early age. I was performing on the stage before I even hit puberty with you. I was doing the equivalent of Britney Spears, sort of like now would be, on the stage. So I think the Thai community always knew. The hard part was being gay, probably to a Thai father, and coming out to my family. That was the hardest part, I think. I don't want to sort of take away from your later questions, but for whatever reason, I think when you have fairly conservative parents, even though everyone else might know and everyone else in the Thai community is comfortable with your gayness, the conservative parents are always the last to sort of like see it, because they don't want it to be that. My mum was always amazing. My mum, she's fabulous. And I don't think it was ever a big deal to her. And I think on several occasions, she's always said to me, I don't care who you love or, what sexual orientation you are, as long as you're a good person. And that you treat other people with kindness and respect and live your life that way. With my dad, it was very different. And I think it was quite hard for him to this day, but he's tried really hard to accept it. He's been more than, not always successfully, but more than gracious about it to my face. But in terms of the Thai community in this country, as it is in many countries, is very much focused around the Thai temple. The Thai temple is not somewhere that anybody, whether you're straight or gay, bring your sexuality to. It's somewhere where you bring your heart to, somewhere where you bring your kindness to. In terms of being gay around other people in the community, it's never been a problem. And even though we've always had those gossips, and you know who I'm talking about, certain older people who love to talk about other people's business, when it came to people's sexuality, they were never that bad about it. It never became an issue. And again, I feel as if I was always judged on my sort of personal merit, how nice I was as a person, as opposed to who I slept with. So in that respect, I'm really fortunate, and I've got a lot of time and gratitude to the Thai community for that, because they've never made me feel like an outsider.
No, just from my experience being friends with you, Bear, like I felt like exactly what you said. Like I knew that you were, you were gay from when we were young. And to me, I never thought that was any different. I didn't see it as anything that was weird. You were just my friend, regardless. And I remember us even playing with Barbie dolls at one point. And I remember it just never felt odd. It never felt strange. It never
No.
felt weird. And so for me, that's
Yeah,
who you've been. I've always accepted you for who you are. And
yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. Your friends around you is a huge thing, isn't it? It's something who
it
you surround
is.
yourself with is very, very important.
I have to interject. I hated the way you dressed your Barbie dolls, I have to say.
I can't even remember. I can't even remember.
I was like,
That
what
was
is she
hilarious.
doing? What is she
Probably bad,
doing?
really bad. I can't remember.
So funny.
But it's interesting you talk about your dad and how
Yeah.
how you came out to your family, because that's the next question that we were going to
Mm.
ask is sort of how did you tell your family? How did they react? And I remember one little memory of us that you told me, well, you introduced me, and Deborah would understand about to makeup, basically, like to we looked at Shuamira. Shuamira was like a huge brand back then, wasn't it? There.
Yeah.
And basically we talked about, like, you put that on. I remember you putting that makeup on, and I remember,
Mm.
I think it was your dad, he might have said, do you have makeup on, or something like that, when we walked out the house.
Really?
Yeah, I remember that moment. And I didn't, to me that didn't feel different or weird or strange.
No, no,
but
no.
but I just wondered, sort of going back to that question, how did it feel when you had to come out to your dad?
It was really weird. I mean, going back to that memory of yours, and it's really weird. It's interesting because, the new generation of gay people, makeup for them and expressing yourself, as non-binary is a real thing now. And I'm so proud of them. I love the new generation. I try to keep up with their music. I try to keep up, with what they're wearing. They are the future. Do you know what? Where previous generations of gay people haven't succeeded, they're really pushing the agenda, not just in terms of sexuality, but in terms of gender disparity, in terms of color disparity. They're brilliant. Whereas back then, when I was putting makeup on my face, I didn't see it as expression of my sexuality or indicative of being LGBT at all. To me, it was a creative. It was like, it was fun. It was like how a child sort of like ends up sort of using paints or Play-Doh. It was creative and it was fun, and it was really good. And I realized that I couldn't play with that with the boys that we knew, but I definitely could play with that with you. So at first it's confusing, and like all children, when your parent disapproves, especially your father when you're a son, it really hits you hard, and you're like, oh, okay. And that memory you have is probably one of the earliest times where I actually felt really hurt and scared, because I was like, no child wants their parents' disapproval. And after that, you learn to sort of like to hustle, to sort of hide those parts of yourself from that parent because you don't want that disapproval. I want to sort of go back a bit, actually. 2 weeks ago, and it's really amazing that I'm doing this interview now, because 2 weeks ago I was actually part of a Zoom call, which was actually a study on Asian men and mental health. And it was me and 6 other Southeast Asian men. So they had an East Asian group, they had a Southeast Asian group, and they had people from South Asia. So each group was from a different area, and they also had Caribbean. But it was all about sort of men from those areas and mental health. All of them were immigrants, like like us, so part of a diaspora. And it was the first time I'd really spoken about mental health with other Asian men. One thing that stuck in my mind was a Chinese guy, really lovely Chinese guy from Birmingham, and I still can't get over hearing Asians speaking with like strong Brummy accents or strong
Northern accents, yeah.
Northern accents. It really sort of freaks me out. I'm like, oh my god. He was talking about how, and he was straight. This group was not based on sexuality. It was based upon cultural and ethnic background and mental health. And he was talking about how his father, since as long as he can remember, had this incredibly violent sort of cis male rage in him, which is actually really common amongst Asian men who are first generation immigrants. I don't understand it. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know if it's really hard to be a cis male, if, for that sort of, first generation immigrant male. But I found the same in my father. And it's because you care for them. You don't want to give them more burden. And when you realize, and when they make you feel like, oh, actually, me being gay could be a really massive burden for him, you end up sort of hiding it, really, really hiding it. It all came about one day. So when I was 15, I started exploring what it was to be gay. And by then, there was like publications available, like in W.H. Smith's, and they weren't porno publications. They were community publications like Attitude Magazine, The Pink Paper, Gay Times. And I used to just drink it up. It was like articles about people like me, and everything, every little advert sort of was, aimed at people like me. It was amazing. And I was like, wow. So I bought these things with what money I had as a 15-year-old. And then eventually I think my father found them, as fathers always do, under my bed. And that was the, apocalypse, if you like. It was that conversation where he asked me into the guest room, and I remember like the whole thing. And he asked me, "Are you gay?" And he wasn't saying it in a nice way. He was saying it in a real sort of like, I don't know. It was like absolute poker face, no feelings, nothing. And I kind of looked at him and I said, yeah. And I just broke down. I literally broke down, and I was apologizing, and I was saying, I'm so sorry. I'm saying so sorry. I literally felt like one of those sort of Japanese samurai that was just, sort of kowtowing to the emperor and just saying, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to disrespect you and to dishonor you, blah, blah. I'm not going to share with you what he said back to me because it probably wasn't the kindest thing. But at least it was out. At least it was out. And I remember spending the rest of the evening in my bedroom. And then I don't know if it's the same for all Asian cultures, but the dinner table is quite important. So by dinner time, I knew that I had to be at the dinner table. And it was probably the most awkward, like difficult sort of sitting down at the dinner table I've ever had in my life. Things were strange for a while. And I think we both decided, you know what, let's just carry on as normal. And things just gradually sort of became normal again. It was like nothing has changed, but everything had changed. And eventually I ended up leaving home when I was 16. I left home really young. And the part of it was this tension between me and him. I don't know if I was being unfair or if I was being hormonal. Looking back, I don't know if I was being rash, to be honest with you. I'm 40 now, over 40. And looking back, you're a lot kinder to yourself when you're older. But at the time, everything was just so much. Everything was so intense. But I ran away from home after that. And I never actually went back home. I went to a teacher who had always given me support and always given me understanding. I went to her house because I spent time at her house before, sort of doing study sessions and whatnot. She had to obviously call my parents to tell me where I was. They hadn't even noticed that I'd left.
Oh my gosh.
I know, they were literally like in their bedroom. They hadn't even noticed that I'd left. And here I was, sort of like just sort of having the worst day of my life ever. But yes, and they were kind of shocked and everything. Fast forward a few years, and my dad once broke down with me, and he said that I hadn't given him a chance, that somehow I'd been unfair, that I hadn't given a chance. And I was like, Dad, I gave you 16 years, to try and sort of like, be there for me, and you never were. But I don't hold it against him, and again, it's difficult, I think, when you're, born of immigrant parents, because their cultural identity and their cultural norm is so different to what they brought you into. And I don't think anyone who moves abroad permanently can prepare themselves for that. Well, I'm putting myself in their shoes. They have a very fixed idea of what it is to be English, what it is to be successful in England. And in a way, my sisters, because they were younger, they've really sort of like actually succeeded, and they've really sort of taken that torch and gone somewhere with it. And I'm so proud of them. But for me, it was like I was kind of the test subject. So all of my parents' mistakes sort of got practiced on me, if you like, and there was a lot of them. I mean, I'm in a great place now. I'm engaged to, in fact, one of the publishers of one of those magazines that actually sort of, I used to buy back then, which is amazing. I've been with him for 20 years, which is most of, my gay adult life, which is actually not very common in terms of gay people. But yeah, coming out was really hard at a sort of a personal level, at a family level. But at the same time, honestly, it was like this incredible whoosh, like freedom, to be myself. And I think me, Amra. It was like there was somebody inside me bursting to come out anyway. And I don't know if I can call that gay, but it was definitely me that needed to come out, and that was part of me. I'm lucky because I came out and I had the strength and this environment around me. I was in the capital city, I had all this culture. Gay culture was getting to a point where it was just about to explode. And everyone was gay was about to change forever. Before 1995, 96, it was a very different story. But I just happened to be on that wave when everything was changing.
I think you've kind of answered the question about whether, the next one, which was, do you feel the need to hide your sexuality, especially within the ESEA community? But you can add to that if you feel there's anything that we might have missed.
I never felt the need to hide it from the community. Like I said, it's a very understanding community, Thai community, and at different levels. One of the things is that I think LGBT people have always had representation and presence in Thai culture. And this is before the UK. There's always been trans, there's always been gays, there's always been lesbians. Nobody talks about it because ultimately, and that's not because it's LGBT, but ultimately in Thailand, nobody really talks about the real things. So no one really talks about what it is to really be human and the life experience. Everyone talks about everything else. So everyone loves to talk about money. Everyone loves to talk about other people's business. But when it comes to the real things, no one really talks about it. So it wasn't really that hard for me to be gay. I think if I'd grown up in Thailand, it would have been different, because I know a lot of working class Thai gays have had to run away, have found themselves homeless before they've actually sort of like found themselves in a secure position. A lot of trans people have been alienated. But like I said, saying that, there was always more of a presence of LGBT in Thailand than there has been in a lot of the Western Christian societies.
For sure.
Yeah, and for that I'm lucky. And sort of being specific to London, because the London Thai community has always been focused around the Wimbledon Temple, which is somewhere you don't take your sexuality to. You just take your best self to. I've never felt alienated at all.
No.
At all.
Yeah.
And because I've got friends like you, Amra,
Oh.
which is like, yeah, the best thing.
No, that means a lot. And oh gosh, I mean, this whole conversation, because this is like something that we've never really spoken about, really. So
No,
this is,
we never had to.
No, we never had to. Never had to.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I hope that this will be something that will be an eye opener for people to say, look at your story and look what's happened and where you are now. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things that was quite interesting that I thought that you spoke about was family. And like, I have relatives as well in Thailand that are gay and they're lesbian. And my family are very supportive of that, actually, on my mum's side, very specifically. And I think that's helped my cousins quite a fair bit, because a lot of them have chosen to go down that path, and we don't even batter an eyelid. It's just the way it is,
I don't know if you've had the same experience, Amra, and maybe perhaps you as well, Deborah, in your community. But in Thailand, there's this thing. Like, I have this uncle, yeah, and I'm not going to say who, and it's an uncle on my mum's side, who for the longest time has had a friend and has lived with this friend. And nobody talks about sort of like all of his sort of like show tunes and musicals and and sort of like brightly colored scarves. It's like, oh, come on already, just get over it, he's gay, you know what I mean? It's like, but that's my mum's generation. I think people spoke, that was what gay men did. You lived with your friend. I mean, fair dues. I'm so impressed, because those friends often have relationship, although they have relationship with their partner for like decades, but for the whole time they have to actually sort of call them their friend, not their partner or their spouse. Hopefully things are changing now. I'd like to think so. I follow a lot of sort of like Thai popular culture magazines and blogs, and there seems to be a lot more acceptance and also a lot more campaigning going on for gay presence in Thai culture, which is great. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of is similar to the question I'm just about to ask you, but has there been any role models, I suppose, within the Thai community, but also just role models in general that have made you feel comfortable about coming out when you did, or just through your journey?
Do you know what, Amra? I looked at this question because for those of people who are watching this, I got sent these questions before the interview, just to give me a heads up. And I stared at that question for the longest time of any of the other questions, because I was trying to think about it. I was like, I had it quite hard because there was no role models for me. You can think about in the great sort of on the world stage. Yes, there are role models. I can list Madonna. I can list James Baldwin. I can list several people. But in terms of Thai community, I was pretty much on my own. Yeah. And because, like I said, the older generation did things differently. You lived with your friend. You never spoke about being gay. You never identified as being gay, even though your life behind closed doors was actually gay. I didn't have anything to show me how things should be done. And so no, I didn't have a role model. But the closest thing I did have to a role model, I think, are probably the women in the Thai community. And I'm not saying that as a gay cliche. I mean, honestly, whether it's you, Amra, or my mother, or my aunties, or my other Thai friends, your ability to actually sort of, make a voice for yourself, make a stand for yourself as Thai community diaspora was amazing, because you're not only in a different country, you're in a whole new decade, a whole new social environment, social landscape. And the way that you, Amra, and other people I know have succeeded as people of color in the position that you are, as female people of color, I think that's amazing. So I always thought, wow, if my mum can do that, if my mum can actually overcome, all of this and be so bloody amazing, and you, Amra, live the life the way you do, then I can. Because ultimately, I don't think that there's any equality for any of us until women are actually given equality and respected equally. Because that ultimately, I think, is the battle. I mean, so much of what it is to be gay in Thailand, in Thai community, in Caribbean community, in Northern European community, isn't actually homophobia, it's actually misogyny. What I'm told every day is if you behave like a woman, if you are feminine, if you do anything which even resembles, femininity, then you are somehow weak. You are somehow, less, less of a person. So ultimately, I fight misogyny every single day, nowhere near as much as you or any other woman that I know, but definitely that's what we're fighting. And to me, women will always be my role model because, what you overcome on a daily basis is incredible.
So nice. Is there any questions, Deborah, that you want to ask?
I just found it really interesting when you mentioned you saying your experience perhaps would have been different if you had grown up in Thailand, because perhaps, obviously, you will never know unless you have that experience directly, but perhaps, you've heard so many stories about people running away or being alienated by the society. I found that really interesting because growing up, especially as an EC female in Britain, especially in the Korean community, Chinese community, I didn't hear a whisper or peep about anything to do with the LGBTQ community. And the only kind of references that I had or anything within the EC community was always the Thai community and Thailand. And so for me, I always, from a very young age, felt like, oh, Thailand's so forward. I always felt like that, very forward thinking. We're talking decades ago. And even now, way ahead versus any other like EC community. So that's actually something that I did want to ask about was, why, and perhaps this is a question towards Amra as well, why do you think, particularly with the Thai community, that it's so open and accepting? So it was quite interesting to hear, like, there is that other element where there is the alienation. And
I'm quite obsessed with sort of anthropology in some ways, and I'd like to make connections around the Pacific cultures. And I think the further south you go, so around the Pacific Rim, and I mean Southeast Asia, right the way down to Polynesian islands, there's very much an element of live and let live. Thai people would love to call it Buddhism, but I don't think it's Buddhism. I think it's deeper than that. I think it's something that's much older. And it's very much a live and let live sort of attitude. I think that part of the world, Southeast Asia, Pacific Rim, has always been plentiful in terms of food and produce. So there's never really been much issue or much need for people to fight or get distressy with each other, even when it comes to sexuality. That said, there are areas like the Philippines and Indonesia, which I have huge respect for and much love. But they're obviously taken on religious aspects like Catholicism and Islam, which have had an effect on the way that they view LGBT people. I follow this quite closely. I mean, I love this publication online called Coconuts, which I think comes out of Singapore, but it sort of covers local and cultural news across Southeast Asia. And they're always talking about LGBT attitudes in places like Indonesia and Philippines, and they're changing slowly. But like I said, that part of Southeast Asia, I think, has always had a let live attitude, and to some extent, if you don't ask, you don't tell. So people just get to live their lives. East Asia, I think, has always been different in the sense that I think there's been an awful lot more hardship in East Asia culturally, which means that where there's cultural hardships, there are usual social tensions. And one of those things that that are always attacked straight away when there are social tensions is sexuality. Also, I find that I think with East Asia, politically and culturally and socially, they've always been more conservative. I can't say that's better or worse. It's just a difference in the culture. I do feel sometimes, I mean, at the moment, I'm loving Taiwan. Taiwan to me are like just incredible. Their sort of attitudes towards LGBT and the size of their pride every year and everything is just amazing. I like to kind of think that they're trying to sort of, I think, be provocative against the sort of the greater Chinese culture, because obviously in mainland China it's still taboo. In fact, it's still illegal. So that's why they're doing it. But whatever they're doing, it's amazing. I do feel a lot for some of my Chinese peers, because Chinese people I know who have come out as LGBT have been completely cut off from their families. That's not something you hear so much from when it comes to Thai families, but when it comes to Chinese, Japanese, Korean, that's a lot more common. I think the notion of honor has a much bigger hold on East Asian communities, and somehow by coming out as gay as a son, less so as a lesbian, but definitely that's also difficult. You're dishonoring your family, which I think is really old and outdated and shouldn't be around anymore. I'm complimented, Deborah. I think that's quite poignant. Thailand is definitely unique in its acceptance and also the LGBT presence in the Thai community and Thai culture.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to add really was when you were talking about the idea that when you go to the temple, you're not judged. You said it's not so much to do with Buddhism, but it ties in with when you go to the temple, you're not really judged. So when I go to Thailand, it's just so common to see people that are gay, lesbian, or transsexual or transvestites. It's just common, and I don't know, I can't answer that question, Deborah. Like I don't know why that is.
It's like I said, I think people are just allowed to live their life. The emphasis in Thai culture and Thai religion is to just be a decent human being.
Yeah.
And that means charity. That means empathy. That means, living life without greed and selfishness. And ultimately, who you sleep with or who you spend your life with doesn't have an impact on that. It's not at the forefront of Thai people's importance. Every alpha straight male I know has a really close gay friend in Thailand. That's always the case. Could probably write a thesis on it, but I won't have time to explain it now.
No, you honestly explained it so eloquently, and everything you said made absolute sense. But that's something honestly that I have witnessed all my life. And I know what you're saying about Taiwan, which is incredible, but I think that's more of a more recent, however many years movement. Whereas with Thailand, it's always, I've always felt like Thailand's always as a country been so forward with that. So
don't underestimate the American influence as well, because so much of modern Thailand is because of the American influence. And I'm going to go back to that actually when you asked me something that very few people know about Thailand. But when my mum tells me about America coming in, it wasn't just the American soldiers that came into Thailand. You had the American movies, the attitudes, the food and the music. So I wouldn't be surprised if that had a massive influence on sort of the liberal attitudes in Thailand. I mean, Thailand's really bad at keeping history, so it's very difficult for us to look back and know exactly where things changed. I would hazard a guess that Americans had a big part to play in that.
It's a combination of everything, to be honest. But I honestly think that value of who you are as a human being, like your soul, is always places priority, is so beautiful. And I think I wish everyone thought like that, but sadly it's not the case. But
And I think you have some nice questions you want to ask Deborah, don't you?
Yeah. So with every guest, with every guest, we try to ask 3 slightly different questions. So just some quick fire questions. Obviously, Thailand. I think a lot of people in Britain are quite familiar with, perhaps whether it's stereotypes or not, general knowledge about Thailand. But is there something that we perhaps wouldn't know that you'd like to share with us about Thailand?
Okay, so I'm going to go a bit deep. Where I was born, which is in Korat, which is also known as Nakhon Ratchasima, is in the northeast of Thailand. It's considered the second city of the northeast. I think the capital is Khon Kaen. And that's part of a province called Isan. And if you look at Thailand, in the far sort of right-hand corner, there's like a big hump which cuts into Laos. What a lot of people don't realize is that that whole part of Thailand is actually a very new addition to the actual geography. It actually all used to be part of Laos. And even then, you can't really say it was part of Laos because Laos wasn't unified actually until, I think, the end of the 19th century. And it wasn't until after the Siamese-Franco War, which is where the Thais and the French fought for that little bit of land, I think was over, that part of Laos was actually given over to Thailand. So before, Thailand had a sort of a huge sort of Laos bit, which wasn't actually even part of Thailand, and the northern eastern corner, that's where I come from. That was only really settled, I think, at the beginning of the 20th century. And it took until the middle of the 20th century, mid-20th century, during what they call the Thaification of the area, where the actual ethnic group that lived there actually were forced to become more Thai. It's a difficult conversation to have because my mother's from that area. Even today, to a large extent, if you come from that area, people take the mick out of you for being rural or country or what they call ban nog, and that's associated with somebody who comes from the Laotian bloodline. And there's a terrible sort of racism which goes on, which is attached to that, because if you're dark, then somehow you're a second-class citizen. And that's also attached to being Laos and being Isan, which is really unfair. But my fact is that Thailand was not actually what you think of Thailand until very relatively recently, the mid-20th century.
Great fact.
Yeah.
Yes.
Blown me away. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, so, well, Amra, you know that bump at the top right-hand corner where you have, like, you know, all of our northeastern cities? None of that was ours. That was actually all given over. Some people say it was given by the French, I know, but some people say that it was taken, or some people said it was agreement. Again, like I said, Thailand's not very good with history, so you have several
variations,
several versions of the truth.
Yeah. But then it also depends whose perspective and whose story it is as well. So, isn't it?
Exactly.
With any history.
Exactly.
So, second question, to be a little bit more lighthearted. I understand you're a big Madonna fan, so I think I will know the answer to this. But what is your go-to karaoke song?
Like a Virgin.
There you go.
That's a classic. Always will be.
Like a Virgin. I'll do that on camera for you one day.
Yeah.
You must roll along the floor as well, like she does in her MTV Movie Awards with things she did. Yeah.
So funny.
Amra, you've seen that like 100 times. You've seen me do that 100 times. There's nothing new.
That's hilarious. And then last but not least, what advice would you give your younger self? And it could be on anything.
I would say be more patient. Don't rush into things. And there's plenty of time. I used to rush into things, and I wanted to meet so many people and see so many things that I ended up leaving things behind. I mean, I say to myself now that I'm the queen of burning bridges without even realizing it. Even sort of like when I left home, I mean, to this day, I don't know if it was the right thing to do. I think I was actually being very hasty and very emotional. I could have actually probably dealt with it better. But I would say be more patient, give yourself more time, don't rush into things. That's what I would say.
Yeah,
great
I mean,
advice.
I think we could all take on that advice.
That's great advice.
So before I wrap up, is there anything else that you wanted to say, Amra or Bear? Is there anything else before I wrap up?
There is. I wanted to speak about anybody who is watching this and they might be young from an Asian community and they feel like they might be LGBT or identify as LGBT. Something I didn't mention in the previous questions is something that really helped me a lot was youth groups. I'm so grateful because I actually found through the publications that we didn't have internet in those days, but through the publications that I mentioned earlier, I found youth groups across London, and every area had its own LGBT youth group. And now they're even better, and they're more funded, and there are more of them. It's the best place to start because they'll give you safe spaces, they'll give you advice. Some people don't find those youth groups until they start going to gay bars and clubs, and those places can be vicious. They can be really intimidating and really exploitative environments. I would say look up, your local LGBT youth group and hit them up. Go to theproudtrust.org or go to stonewall.org.uk. They'll have a list of places you can go and talk to, whether you're gay, straight, or even a little bit bi, but you're not quite sure. Get in contact, speak to them. You're not by yourself, and it doesn't mean that you're committing to something lifelong. One of my closest friends, he identified as gay for about 5 years and then decided that he was actually more in love with a woman than he was a man, which is also okay. Don't suffer in silence. There are places for you to go. I would say hit up a youth group, and that was the best thing I ever did.
That's amazing advice.
Great advice.
Following on from that, we will definitely add all the links that Bear's just mentioned down below in the description bar. So, and also we obviously always ask everyone to reach out, ask any questions, share any feedback, and obviously not only myself but also Amra and Bear, we would love to hear from you about this particular episode, this topic. Feel free to reach out to us in private as always as well. Thank you so much, Bear, for just being on. Honestly, we've learned so much, but also you have been so eloquent, you've been so deep and honest with us. Like, honestly, we're so grateful.
I love to talk.
No, honestly, this episode actually really touched me. So yeah, thank you so much for agreeing to be on this episode.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Deborah. Thanks, Amra.
No, thank you.
So we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video. We'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
Amazing.